Crushed Mexican Spiders and Possibly 40 Ships are two short stories. Crushed Mexican Spiders is about a young lady in South London who gets home to find that the key to her door no longer works. And Possibly 40 Ships is the true story, the story they don't want you to know about the Trojan War and what really happened there. I'll read you a little bit from Possibly 40 Ships. Out at sea, the weather turns nasty. You don't have to be a bore of Windlaw to see this was bad. Xanthos orders us to land. Menelaus, who's been afloat twice on a lake, says no, we can ride it out. Xanthos's crew, these old salts, they're so maritime they're practically fish. They're all terrified. Menelaus's bodyguard, his favourite killers, they're all terrified. You understand how when someone's really helped you, you really hate them. Menelaus hated Xanthos because he owed him everything and because he made money from wines of no fame. People don't want good wine, they want bad wine, cheaply, Xanthos used to say. Bad wine is, even if you piss into it, which I do, wine. You can only go out of business worrying about quality. Menelaus countermanded Xanthos not because he thought he was right, but because he had to. So, the storm comes, and afterwards, we're the only ship in sight, in a sort of corpse and wreckage soup. No one said anything. There was a lot of toe-gazing. Even for a king, it's embarrassing losing your entire army before the war starts. Finally, Menelaus breaks his silence. He had Xanthos thrown overboard. That's the debts taken care of. Now, lads, a slow story-building trip home, he proclaims. It was Xanthos's impiety and recklessness that cost us everything. Any questions? There were no questions. We were glad to be alive and heading home, all of us vowing never to leave land again. Then the lookout shouts that there are 3 ships approaching with Trojan insignia. We're almost crippled, we can't outrun them, and the storm must have pushed us into Trojan waters. Listen carefully, says Menelaus. There was no army. There was no war. We love those Trojans to profanity. I'll say this for Menelaus. He would have decapitated his mother for a bowl of fresh figs, and he couldn't organise a cockfight, but he could lie from dawn to dawn. The Trojans bored us. They're no fools. Word has reached them about Menelaus and his army, but since Menelaus hails them like brothers, as brothers you actually like, they take him to Troy, which he maintains is exactly where he wants to go. At Troy, we're greeted rather like dead rats in the water supply. The idea of slitting Menelaus's throat and using him as fertiliser is visibly given consideration. But maybe they admire the way he lies, but King Priam and the others listen. Menelaus stands there and declares he came to Troy because he wanted a Trojan wife, now that Paris has a Greek one. He adores their culture so much he wants to learn how to speak Trojan, to recite some of their great epics, and to gorge on that famous Trojan fried pigeon. They listen to him, pondering fertiliser. But he's their jug, and everyone has a sister or a daughter they want to get rid of. They think about fertiliser, but maybe it's better to have a marriage of some sort. And if they kill Menelaus, maybe, possibly, someone in Greece will seek revenge. So, they marry Menelaus off to a very minor princess. They tattoo Menelaus with Trojan emblems, including one on his back, which I was reliably informed signified, I am Priam's jug. And they make him recite 30 lines of poetry every evening.
And what was the thinking for bringing these 2 particular stories together?
Well, partly because they're different, partly because these are the 2 short stories I had ready. The first one is a sort of slightly sort of horror story, I suppose, set in South London, in contemporary Brixton. and the other one is a sort of romp through literary history. It's a sort of the truth about the Trojan War and what really went on. It's my version of what went on behind Homer's activities.
Crushed Mexican Spiders is set in Brixton, and you've used this location as a setting before in your fiction. What is it that you find inspiring about the area?
Well, it's that I live there. I've lived in Brixton off and on since the mid-80s. I bought a flat there many years ago, and although I've spent time in other countries, in Hungary and elsewhere, I keep on coming back to the flat. Brixton, I mean, it's a lively place to live. As a writer, you're never going to be short of inspiration. I mean, it's changed now. I mean, it's almost unrecognisable to what it was in the 80s. It's become a sort of Hampstead of the South now. Certainly, the centre of Brixton is very she. I mean, you can still get shot on the outskirts, but the centre's become very civilised. And even the drug dealers who used to sort of hang around near the Ritzy, I think have gone, not because of any sort of police action, but simply because they just feel so out of place there now.
One of the things I've noticed when you're interviewed overseas, the journalists and critics seem to get very cross at your depiction of London, and they say, surely it can't be so bad. And the depiction of London in Crushed Mexican Spiders is again...
Well, they don't live here, do they? No, it's when I travel around, all the sort of 20, 30-something people I speak to in Europe, in France, in Germany, Hungary, all they really want to do is come and live in London. London has become the sort of capital of Europe, and it's the place you want to come to, even if it's only for a few months. Not necessarily to spend your whole career here, but everyone wants to come here. And of course, visiting a place is always very different from actually living there for a long time.
I mean, obviously it's fiction, but is there a grain of truth in your feelings about London, in the alienation that the character feels?
Very often. I mean, they're certainly living in Brixton. There were days when I was, very tired of living there because I'm only about a sort of 12-minute walk from the underground station. And until very recently, it was almost impossible for me to make that 12-minute walk without being asked for money or having someone scream at me. And when you get that day after day after day, it does become very wearing.
Let's move to the second story, possibly 40 Ships, which depicts the Trojan War. Is that a long-term interest of yours, antiquity?
Yes. I mean, I actually studied Latin at Cambridge, where it still counts as a modern language. So I've always had an interest in classical literature, and obviously the Iliad and the Odyssey are the sort of the basis of all literature or Western culture. So I suppose it's one of those subjects, I think, that most writers think about tackling in some way during their careers. I mean, there are so many spin-offs and versions of the Iliad and the Odyssey, so it's my little contribution to that genre.
And did this strike you as an untold story, or was it more potential for the humour?
I mean, you don't, or at least I don't. I mean, before I write something, I don't sit down and think, now, this is what I want to write. I just write, and at the end of it, something comes out. I mean, after, 5 novels and the collection of short stories, I think it's safe to say that I seem to be a comic writer. Most of what I write seems to be of, a humorous bent. But I didn't sit down one day and decide I want to be a comic writer. I was interested in writing, and that's what's come out.
But I mean, you don't sit down and suddenly start finding you're writing about the Trojan War by accident, right?
No, I just had an idea. There's a very famous play, well, not famous here, but there's a French play by a guy called Giraudoux called The Trojan War Won't Happen, which is set just before the start of the Trojan War. And I always liked that title because, of course, everyone knows perfectly well, yes, it did. Yeah. And I just thought, well, maybe, I can take it one stage further and suggest that, in fact, the Trojan War never happened, and it's all just one elaborate spin and hype, which, of course, in the current situation has some relation to world affairs.
So, Unbound is a new publishing venture that you've been involved in. You were the second writer to be published by them, is that right?
That's right. Terry Jones was the first. It's an interesting new venture. It's both very modern in one aspect because it's an online net phenomenon, and in another it's a reversion to the 18th century subscription model, The idea is writers put up a pet project on the site, and then if people like the idea, they can subscribe to the book, and when a certain number of subscribers have signed up, the book gets published.
And the book is beautifully produced. Did you choose the photography yourself?
Yeah, the photographer is an old friend of mine, a very talented Czech photographer. And I asked her to come up with a couple of covers, which she did, I think, very successfully.
And did she read the stories beforehand?
Yeah, no. She's a very thorough. She's very, very methodical, and she read the stories very carefully and thought about them. And in fact went to Portugal to do one of them for some reason.
And could you see yourself going further with this model and say sending readers a story as you wrote them to a sort of group that was signed up for the whole thing?
Maybe. I mean, I'm a bit of a. I mean, I sent these two stories in because, you know, I'd already finished them. I'm a bit of a fusspot and I work very slowly, so I'd hesitate to sort of take people's money before I'd actually written it, although a lot of the projects on Unbound are that. They're just, you know, ideas on a piece of paper that for books that haven't been written. But since I work very slowly and I never know how long it's going to take me to do something, I'd hesitate to take the money first, because then it would be hanging over me all the time.
You were granted Best of British Author, and now you've been chosen for Fiction Unbound. And how important do you think these promotions are to find readers?
Well, I mean, it's always nice to have a pat on the back. I mean, whatever line of work you're in, it's always nice to get a bit of recognition and encouragement. The granter thing for me was a very big thing because of the 20 people on that promotion. I'm sure I'm the one who benefited most, because my first book had just come out from a very small Scottish press. So I'm very grateful to that grantor list. And as I say, with this, you know, it's nice to get some recognition, and particularly for two short stories. You know.